Okay, so let's talk about the first half of the 20th century. It was an explosion. You've got this incredible technological progress that's promising a better world for everyone, but at the exact same time, it's delivering destruction on a scale nobody had ever seen before, and this huge, deep sense of spiritual loss. In English literature, it was right there, smack in the middle of it all, trying to make sense of this wild contradiction. So, how did it capture this incredible mix of progress and, regress? Let's dive in. We're going to break this down into 5 parts. First, we'll look at that central paradox of the century. Then, we'll talk about the super stable Victorian world that got completely shattered. Next, the forces that did all the shattering. After that, how this whole thing created a massive divide in art. And finally, we'll see what kind of new world, the world of the mass man, rose up from the rubble. So, let's start with that big paradox. Right. To really get a handle on this era, you have to start with the central conflict that defined pretty much everything. It's a paradox that didn't just shape art and books, it changed how people saw themselves and their whole place in the universe.
I mean, we're talking about change on a scale that humanity had just never seen before. Think about it. In just 50 years, from the end of the Victorian era to the middle of the century, the world wasn't just changing a little bit, it was being fundamentally rewired. The pace of it all was just breathtaking.
This slide really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? The scientific revolution was like this two-sided coin. On one side, you've got amazing progress, right? The internal combustion engine gives us cars, airplanes, it promises freedom, connection, a smaller world. But then you flip that coin over, and that very same engine is powering the tanks and planes of 2 world wars, leading to mass slaughter. And then the nuclear threat that could just end everything. So you've got this incredible mastery over the physical world happening at the exact same time as a total moral collapse. It's a staggering contradiction. Now, to really feel the shock of this new world, we have to understand the old one. It just completely shattered. So let's take a quick step back into the Victorian mindset. You see, the Victorians built their world on what they thought were unshakable foundations. Everything felt permanent, like it was etched in stone for all time. The family, the government, the massive British Empire, and Christianity. These weren't just ideas to them, they were seen as final, absolute, unchanging truths. And you can see the shift so clearly right here. The whole Victorian spirit was about acceptance and affirmation. You listen to authority, period. But the 20th century mind, it was defined by the exact opposite. This relentless, burning need to question everything, this feeling that all things were constantly changing, and a deep-seated rebellion against that old order. This line from George Bernard Shaw's play just captures that feeling perfectly. Can you imagine the psychological whiplash of realizing that everything you thought was solid rock was actually built on sand? That's the feeling that defined an entire generation, the ground literally shifting beneath their feet. So, what caused this great crumbling? Well, that brings us right to our next section, the Great Interrogation, and all the forces that basically took a sledgehammer to that old world. It was really a perfect storm of change. You had technology, like the motor car, which gave young people a freedom they'd never had before, literally driving them away from their parents' control. You had art, like Shaw's plays, putting sacred cows like religion and morality on trial, right there on a stage for everyone to see. And then, of course, World War I delivered the killing blow, just destroying a generation's faith in the leaders who sent them into the trenches. And this quote from Shaw is the philosophical bombshell of the entire era. He's asking this crucial question: why are we so happy to throw out our old, clunky technology, but we cling so tightly to our old ideas? This was a direct challenge. Every belief, every moral code had to be put under a microscope, tested, and if it didn't hold up, you had to scrap it. This massive split in society created a fault line that ran right through the world of literature. And it wasn't just a small crack, it was a profound, unbridgeable divide. So, 2 totally distinct camps emerged. On one side, you have the old guard, writers like Shaw and H.G. Wells. They believed in art for life's sake. They were writing to communicate, to reach the whole community. But on the other side, you get the new guard, the modernists like James Joyce and T.S. Eliot. Their motto was art for art's sake. Their audience was a tiny, intellectual elite, and their work was often deliberately difficult and complex. And the modernists, they weren't apologizing for this split at all. In fact, they were defending it.
T.S. Eliot, for one, argued that this wasn't chaos or a problem, it was a new kind of order. He seriously believed that important, serious art had to be for a select few.
But this is where it gets really interesting. While all the highbrow critics were championing this new, complex literature and basically saying nobody reads guys like John Goldsworthy anymore, he's obsolete, well, the public kept buying his books. In fact, the Forsyte Saga was a massive bestseller, nearing its 50th printing. This just shows you this huge, gaping disconnect between the intellectual tastemakers and what regular people were actually reading and enjoying.
So, after the old world was completely torn down and art itself was fractured, what kind of society rose up from the ashes? That brings us to our final section, the Age of Mass Man. The post-war era brought in the welfare state and a new, affluent society. But this prosperity, it had a serious shadow side. Mass production meant the death of individual craftsmanship. Consumerism brought with it this powerful new advertising culture that sold happiness in a box. So it was a world of material comfort, for sure, but also one of deep alienation. And that alienation is what fueled the revolt of youth and gave rise to countercultures like the beatniks.
At the heart of this new age was an advertising industry that didn't just sell products, it sold feelings. As critics were quick to point out, advertisers were basically rewiring our brains, teaching us to connect our deepest emotions, like love, with consumer goods. All of a sudden, your personal happiness seemed to depend on buying the right brand of beer or the perfect new gas stove.
And the beatniks were a direct result of this. They were so disgusted by what they saw as this shallow, materialistic world that they just decided to contract out of it completely. They rejected its values, its clothes, its religion, everything. They were a powerful symptom of a society desperately searching for meaning somewhere beyond all the stuff it was buying.
And this final quote from Shaw brings us right back around. In an age where new literary anti-heroes were celebrating a kind of barbaric loudishness, and contempt for authority was the cool new thing, this line is like a haunting echo of a lost ideal, a belief that civility and good manners were the very glue holding society together. So when you look back at this whole journey, this incredible upheaval of the 20th century, it leaves us with a really big question, and it's one that honestly still haunts us today. When you tear down all the old certainties, the old moralities, the old institutions that held everything together, what exactly rushes in to fill that void? And maybe the even bigger question is, are we ever really prepared for the answer?